Welcome to the Navigating Dental Insurance Podcast, where we don't take from insurance companies. Here are your hosts, Mr. Jordan Comstock and Mr. Ben Tuine.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the Navigating Dental Insurance Podcast. My name is Ben Tuine. Today I am your solo host. Jordan Comstock is tied up today. For once, he's not on the podcast. It's usually me that's tied up either in a meeting or business travels around the country. But Jordan does send his love. It's Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's out there to all of you. We appreciate you taking time to listen to our podcast today. Today, we have an excellent guest with us, somebody that I feel is an expert in her field of coaching, Susan Leckowicz. How are you, Susan?
I'm great, Ben. How are you?
I'm very well. I know I just asked you how to pronounce your name. Did I get that right?
Perfect.
Perfect. Well, Susan met, do you go by Susan or Susie or Sue?
Not Susie. Susan or Sue.
Susan or Sue. Okay.
Not really Susan.
Very good. Well, I know that you know Jordan. You met Jordan at the Jumpstart meeting at the beginning of the year. You know, I often thought, I always see these meetings going on at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, you know, following the Christmas holiday, and then jumping right into a conference. I mean, talk to me about that. Like, what are the emotions going through your mind as you're entering a new year, going to this Jumpstart conference? I've never been. I would love to go, but that's where you met Jordan. But tell our listeners a little bit about that Jumpstart history, that meeting that you go to at the beginning of the year.
Well, you know, I thought it was a really kind of nice time of year to kind of get focused on what you want to do, right, in the coming year. And one of the things that I really set my sights on is doing more speaking. And I saw the lineup that Vanessa had coming to this event, and I've known her for many years, and going, starting the year off with that, I thought would be a lot of fun. I know sometimes my clients in the beginning of the year, they're sort of getting back into the swing of things at work, and sometimes it can be a little quieter for me. I think that first week, of January. So timing was good, and being from New England and going to Arizona, was a lot of fun. So, so it actually fit well into my schedule.
Oh, that's awesome. And I understand that you come from a background of dentistry. Like, your father was a dentist. Is he still practicing?
He practiced for 50 years.
Wow.
And unfortunately, he's passed away, but he was able to practice, thank you, from about age like 26 to 76. And one of the reasons he was able to do that is one of my brothers took over his practice. So as he got older, he could go in 2 days a week. He'd still, have the ability to see the patients that he liked. And people would say to him, "You can't retire. Who's going to take care of me?" And he loved that, and just had a great love for dentistry and loved all the new technology and the new things that were coming. So, I grew up around dentistry. I grew up assisting him as a teenager, and then going to dental hygiene school and working as a hygienist for over 20 years, and getting involved with being coached by different coaching companies, and really kind of enjoying that experience of personal and professional growth and development. And then decided that, I wanted to go out and help doctors and teams like deliver great care and grow their practices and have more fun at work. And that's kind of my story.
That's awesome. So I have to ask, do you live in Boston now?
Well, I went to college in Boston. I live in central Connecticut.
Oh, okay. Not too far away.
Nope.
So does that make you a Patriots fan, or yes or no?
I just got my Patriots T-shirt in the mail. My championship T-shirt that I ordered online. Just got it today. So absolutely, yeah. Awesome.
Well, the LA fans had to mute their radios here for just a minute, but I have a great respect for just great talent in general. And this year's talent, it wasn't necessarily Tom Brady that caused that Super Bowl win. It was a fantastic defense, which was amazing. Usually I played sports, I played football, and I've never been a believer that defense wins championships. I was always a believer that if you have an aggressive offense, you will be unstoppable. And to this day, with what the Patriots have accomplished since, Tom Brady and Bill Belichick have been there, it's all been offense, except for this last game. But it was their offense that brought them here. But I'm not a Patriots fan per se, but I love Tom Brady. I love watching him play. I guess I should say that I'm a true fan of talent. I love watching good talent, and I love talking to people. That it carries over in dentistry. I just love surrounding myself by people that are true experts in their field. And it seems like you have so much experience in dentistry that you're considered one of those true experts in a number of different areas. Question about when you started in dentistry way back when. What are some of the differences you notice with dental insurance from when you started to today? Are there?
Wow. Huge differences, right? I just remember there was a period of time when I worked for my dad, like in the early in the like mid 80s, and he was, patients were using dental insurance, right? And patients were getting $1,000, $1,500 a year, and that kind of bought more dentistry, and there weren't as many PPO plans, and dentists were still like able to have lower overheads and really, have higher profit margins, practicing dentistry. It was so different, than it is now. And people weren't, I think, as insurance dependent or as insurance minded, so I just think, it's really changed a great deal. And I really feel for dentists, because I think dentistry really changes people's lives, and it really improves the quality of someone's life if they can confidently smile, chew, grow old with their teeth. And I believe that finding and providing the right care for patients is such a great, noble career. And it just gets harder and harder with, sometimes patients' perceptions of cost and how they can afford it. And you got to find different ways to help them.
Yeah, it is. It's a little well, not a little. It's very frustrating.
Right.
And the interesting thing is my wife has had a couple of surgeries last year, and she has one more to do this year. And this is just as a result of being an athlete. You're just in constant repair mode throughout your entire life. And yesterday I received pre-authorization on one of her procedures. And I speak to the physician's offices all the time. And it's interesting to me that for certain things, they came out to me and said, we just, yes, there was a pre-authorization, but we just can't do it. And I asked them why. And they said, well, the reason being is simply because the insurance doesn't provide enough of a reimbursement to even cover our cost. And knowing what I know, being an insurance, well, I'm an insurance person on behalf of dental practices in the dental industry. So I know how insurance works. And I let them know. I said, well, why don't you let us pay for it out of pocket? Like we don't want to go through the hassle of trying to find somebody else who's in network. We don't care about that, But unfortunately, most people out there don't have that mentality, right? Unless you really train your patients on how to think outside of the insurance box.
Yeah.
Many practices struggle. So I want to speak about that for a second. So your expertise is a lot that. I remember you mentioning that you've helped many practices come off of insurance. You even had some practices come off of Delta. Is that right?
I have, yes. I've helped transition practice like totally off of Delta Dental. And here in the Northeast, that's a big one,
Yes.
It really is. Or off of, or decrease, their dependence on dental insurance and PPOs. And there's a plan around it, there's a process to it. And it usually, is good to have like a 12-month plan in place, as you move towards that goal, So I recently started working with a practice last April, and, January 1st, they were officially, off Delta. And January, they had their biggest month ever, believe it or not.
Wow.
It was amazing. Yeah. And they had their biggest month ever.
Let's talk about that, because we get requests all the time from listeners all over the country saying, how do we get off of Delta? And most dentists think, let's drop every PPO plan except for Delta. So there's obviously a fear of going out of network with Delta, but also some people want hope on how to do it. And I love talking to people that have that experience on going out of network with Delta. But I want to throw a caution out there to the listeners that whatever Susan has to share now, I just want to let you know that, people throw these disclaimers all the time, TV shows that you watch, do not do this at home.
Yeah.
You don't want to jump into this just from what you hear today. You need to get the right preparation, the right coaching, because we have some clients, before they even become a client of ours, they just feel like, let's just rip off the Band-Aid, let's drop Delta Dental. And then all of a sudden, 75% of their Delta patients leave, and 80% of their practice are Delta patients.
Yeah.
And now they're scrambling, trying to go back in network, but they've lost a lot of patients and a lot of revenue. So to the listeners, take this, next part of the podcast with extreme caution. We're going to provide some resources for you in the end on where you can get the right advice on how to prepare. So, but Susan, if you don't mind, I'd love to just talk about that for a second. How do you assess going on a network with a big plan like Delta Dental? How do you do it successfully? How did you do it, I should say?
Well, the doctors that I worked with, were under the mindset that they could not, provide the level of care they wanted to provide for their patients at, the reimbursement rates that Delta was offering. And they knew that they would need to create things like a membership plan, for patients who didn't have insurance. They knew they'd need to start marketing, after this switch. But as they prepared for this, what they really started to do was have conversations with their patients, and they had the team have conversations with their patients. So the hygienists and the doctors were talking to patients and having conversations about that their relationship with Delta was possibly going to be changing.
Right.
And that what that meant was that they were going to be an unrestricted provider within Delta. So they would still be able to handle all of the paperwork and all the filing, of their claims. They would be able to tell the patient that they would get reimbursement from Delta within 10 to 12 days of the visit, and they were asking for the patient to cover the cost of their services the day of their hygiene visits.
Interesting.
So, yeah, they started saying, I've been a dentist a long time. These rates are changing. And what was interesting is many patients have seen this happening in medicine too, just like you described, with your wife's experience. So some patients were kind of like, yeah, I get it. I understand. And I really think you need to be able to also have a way to set yourself apart. You have to really have a fantastic patient experience. You have to be connected to your patients, and you have to have patient loyalty. So that's an important thing to think about, is like, as you move through this transition, what's going to make you different than somebody else who's going to, be a lower cost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Separating yourself. I mean, there's a dental practice in Arizona, and they have one team member that that person's responsibility is finding several pieces of information about the patient's lifestyle, what the patient has been through, and keeping notes on that for the doctor and the hygienist and the team members. So when that person comes in, hey, Susan, I heard about your dog. I am so sorry to hear, or hey, Susan, how was Hawaii? I heard you went to Hawaii recently, and patients come in and they feel just this excellent customer service, this excellent care that people would take the time to know them,
Right.
and this doctor actually writes letters of recommendations for his patients' children. Whenever their children are applied to college or even like a residency program or anything, he'll personally write a note, a recommendation for that person. So, he invests a lot of time. He only works 3 days a week, but get this, he works 3 days a week and does almost $2 million a year in revenue.
Yeah.
at an overhead structure that's less than 50%. And I think that's a key and important part. That part there is something that I think many strive for in terms of patient relationships and loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you do that in a way where it sets you apart, you know? And what time commitment do you need to give? And does that time commitment pay off? Like, what's your experience with that?
Well, I agree with you that it really has to be a whole team approach, right? The whole team has to be on board with, we're going to connect with our patients. And I really believe that in your hygiene visits, if you're trying to do a hygiene visit in 40 or 45 minutes, it makes it tough. I'm a true believer in those hygiene visits should be 50, 60 minutes, because that's going to give you the time to be able to personalize your treatment plan, to get to know your patient, to really have those conversations, about them and their care.
Yeah.
And to be able to have your team, to have the person who's really answering the phones and talking to new patients, when like a new patient will ask, do you take Delta? Do you take my insurance? That team member really has to be comfortable talking to that patient about, the ability to choose your own dentist, to be able to say, sometimes patients have dental plans that change every year. Do you want to have to change your dentist every year because your employer changed your dental plan? And to be able to think about, or have the patient think about, I know insurance is a factor, but besides that, what else is important to you about your care?
Right.
And just kind of shift their thinking, about why why should they see you, and to have that team member really believe in the value and the quality and the level of care that you provide.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, psychologically they refer to that as a pattern interrupt.
Okay.
Where somebody would be talking about just dwelling on something that may be negative or whatever it is. Psychologists recommend that you engage in a pattern interrupt to interrupt that line of thinking, to get somebody to open up to a fresh idea or something positive or something different.
Right.
And the person listening, the key to the pattern interrupts is you have to listen. You have to really, really listen and give a great acknowledgement to what they're saying. And then you can almost talk about anything else, and most of the time people forget about what they were complaining about, and when you're talking about dental insurance, somebody calling in and saying, hey, do you take Delta Dental? And then shifting them to that mentality that they can choose, you have a great quality office, and then pivoting into scheduling, it's a lot of training. It's a lot of technique,
Yep.
And so, one of the questions I know our listeners are asking is, are those scripts really successful? Because many of them get some scripts from, a few companies out there that write these scripts on how to schedule patients as an out-of-network provider.
Sure.
With your way of training, what's your feedback? Can these things really, really work for the average dentist, or do you need to be really high level trained in management and customer service? Like, walk us through that whole process on how to get to that skill level to schedule many patients that call in where you're out of network.
Well, I think what's really important, and a lot of people cringe when I'm going to say this, but is to really record your phone calls and listen to them and think about, okay, how could I have said that differently? Or how could I have changed that? And with anything you practice, you get better at, right?
Yeah.
And everybody hates, role playing or simulation or however you want to call it. But it's just all about kind of practicing and listening and even being kind of brave enough to call somebody back. You could even say, if with these call services, that record calls, you get the patient's name and number, you can call them back. Ben, I know you just called my office, and I was thinking about the conversation we just had, and I wanted to tell you something I just thought of, or I forgot to mention. I've had teams do that, we'd be happy to have you come in for a free consultation and have you meet doctor, and we'll do a a benefits check beforehand, just so we can give you some idea, of what your cost will be. So I think it's having the willingness to be coached and having the willingness to keep an open mind and say, okay, I might not win everybody over, but if I'm willing to listen to myself, record the calls, try these lines, I think it can work. And I've got this one gal in an office, and it's probably taken her 6 to 9 months to get good at this, but she almost thinks of it sort of as like fishing, right? It's kind of like a game. It's like, okay, how am I going to reel this one in? And she really takes great pride in having these conversations.
No, that's awesome. So we're talking about all this prep work that you need to do to drop a big plan like Delta Dental. I'm a big believer that if you don't measure your performance, you're just not going to improve the way you should or the way you can. Yep. I talked about on previous podcasts, so I'm often asked to do the haka. I'm not too sure if you're familiar with what that is. It's a war dance, and it's a New Zealand Maori war dance, and I'm often asked to do that at conferences that I visit, whether I'm speaking or just a guest. And oftentimes these things are recorded by a number of people, and they're posted on Facebook. And I really don't like watching myself live on stage. I used to hate watching myself live on stage because I personally don't like to hear me speak. I'd rather listen to somebody else. But I started listening to myself speak as well as doing the haka. And what I notice is I can't believe I'm not raising my hands all the way up. You're supposed to raise your hands all the way up. Just a small thing is my arms are not, they're supposed to be tight and in. I'm supposed to bend my knees more, and so over the years, what I've learned is I become better at doing the haka, but I also start to get rid of the ahs and the ums when I do speak publicly, because you listen to yourself and you look at those mistakes. Now it's on your mind and it's something that you can focus on. But I think that's a great tip in terms of, preparation on and creating a great client experience, as well as learning how to overcome objections, learning how to schedule those patients when you're out of network. So so getting back on track, we're talking about how you did this in terms of getting a client out of network with Delta Dental. You start by communicating with the patients. Right.
At least 8 to 6 months ahead of time. You start preparing them. There's gonna be probably a change, in our relationship with Delta. So you start the conversations, and I think it's important that you have different financial options in place for patients, such as care credit or lending club or compassionate finance or long-term financing options for patients. You have a membership plan in place. You start to be able to create some type of documentation to be able to give to patients when they come into your office. Right. So I had offices do this in 2 different ways, and I'm not sure if there's any one particular right way to do it. One office decided that before they dropped Delta, they printed up an informational sheet for patients just describing the change. And they really said, as of January 1st, we're no longer going to be in network. With Delta, this is what it's going to mean as far as your, what we're going to do for you as far as filing your claims. We're going to ask that you pay at the time of service. We have this membership plan. We have these financing options. And, we're going to continue to take great care of you. So they wanted the patients to be prepared. And kind of what happened, too, with that office is the word got around town really quickly that the office was doing this. So it kind of got patients calling, going, okay, what's going on? What does this mean? And how am I going to continue to come here? So the team got having these conversations even better. They got better and better at it, on the phone. And what happened with the other office that I coached off, one of them decided we're not going to really officially tell people until they come into the office in January. So when they came in for their visits, the hygienist would say to them, well, Ben, last time you were in, we talked about this change with our relationship with Delta. So we have made the decision to become an unrestricted provider. So today's services, We're going to ask that you, take care of the services today. We're going to file the claim for you. You're going to get a check in the mail. And if a patient said, gee, I forgot about that, or I wasn't prepared, or I didn't remember you said that, whatever they might say, they'd say, okay, well, here's an envelope, here's the cost. So if you could put a check in the mail when you get home, or if you want, I'll call you to get a credit card. Or they'd say, okay, here's my payment. Great, thanks.
Gotcha, yeah.
So what's interesting when you do this is you'll be surprised at some of the patients you think will leave you, won't. And some of the ones you might hope would leave won't, because they like you, and some of the ones that you think, oh, they're so loyal to us, they won't leave. They might,
right?
But they might leave and they might come back, so they'll go somewhere else and they might, gee, she didn't spend as much time scaling my teeth as that last hygienist did. They don't feel quite as clean. Yeah. And they might seem to know, get to notice those differences. So I also really think it's important that there's a strong internal marketing program going at the very beginning, so that we have some kind of thank you program for our patients, that goes along with your Dental State Practice Act, but there's some kind of loyalty or thank you program internally that we're promoting within the practice. I think that's important too.
Yeah, that's awesome. I noticed a couple of things here. You mentioned unrestricted provider instead of out-of-network provider. Does that type of detail matter when you're making these types of moves in terms of looking at how you say things to patients and what you say and what you don't say?
Well, I try to not use the word no, right? And not be negative. So right. We're not in network. How do we say we're not in network?
Gotcha.
We're an unrestricted provider on that plan. What does that mean? Patients that'll be the next question, right? Well, what does that mean? Well, we work with that plan. We submit all the paperwork, but we're not restricted to contracted fees. So, and they might still press, okay, does that mean you're not in network? And I believe in honesty. Yes, we are not in network. We've chosen not to be a part of that network.
I really like that. That's new, by the way, to me. I've never heard it put that way. Unrestricted provider. usually it's all the letters that I've seen and witnessed. It says either out of network or becoming a non-participating provider. And I can see from just a human perspective, when you say non or no or not, the immediate perception is, well, looks like I have to switch dental practices.
Right.
They can no longer see me.
I can't see you. Right. They're not a provider. I can't see you. You don't work with mine. And it's like, no, we work with your plan.
And I love the part about being unrestricted. We don't have any restrictions anymore. We can deliver the dentistry to you that is purely quality driven and not policy driven. I really, really like that.
Right.
So that is a really, really cool phrase, unrestricted provider. And it just speaks to your level of experience in dealing with this, especially on a Delta Dental, because more practice. I know more practices that have failed going out of network with Delta Dental than ones that have been successful. And
really, is that true?
Yes, I have. Your experience in coaching practices to go out of network with Delta is actually rare. Like I don't see a lot of practices. For instance, an oral surgeon friend in Washington, the state of Washington, went out of network with Delta. And within 4 months, like Delta sent letters to all of the patients that received any treatment in the last 2 years, and basically told the patients that they had to seek another oral surgery practice. And almost every last one of them that were on the schedule canceled. But they didn't go through this process. They didn't go through the preparation, notification, and all that, patient communication. So as a result, a lot of people left. And then another general dentistry practice, I believe it was in Missouri, they lost about 2/3 of their Delta patients within 6 months. And Delta charges you money. If you want to rejoin the network within 2 years, they charge you money to join again. It's sort of a way of punishing those doctors and saying, I told you so, told you shouldn't have left. But where I'm interested, and the listeners are interested, is it really possible to go out a network with Delta Dental and based upon your feedback and the others, I'd say that your experience is probably in the true 1% of practices that have really gone out of network with a plan like Delta Dental. Is it scary? Absolutely not. I don't think it is if you're prepared and you have the right person and experience to kind of lead and guide you through that process. One of the other things that you mentioned, Susan, is the loyalty factor. I don't coach offices in person. I'm not a dental coach. I just do insurance stuff. But a client of mine in Spokane, Washington, Dr. Ken Collins, asked me to come out and visit with his team for 3 days. And one thing I noticed is Nicole in their South Valley office, everybody wanted to talk to Nicole. There at 4 p.m. somebody sat in her chair, and by 5:30 that person left. But Nicole just sat and talked to that person, and that person was kind of laying out all her issues and problems and where she lived in the last 20 years. But I talked to Dr. Ken and I said, is this common for your patients to have that much love and trust for your team members? And he's like, yeah, but Nicole's different. Like, people love Nicole. And in fact, she's the reason why a lot of our people come to us out of network, is because once they get to know Nicole, she's so friendly, but they're loyal to the practice, but they're more so loyal to her just because who she is,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they're out of network with a bunch of plans, and they're going to, in the process of going out of network with more. But I like that. I think you shared a lot of really great nuggets for listeners to kind of give them some hope and guidance. And I know we're kind of at our 30-minute mark. So, Susan, any tips, nuggets, or offerings for the listeners out there that might want to learn more about what you do and how to go out of network with plans like Delta?
Sure. I'd be happy to offer a free coaching call with any listener who wants to reach out to me. You can reach me. I'm Susan at dentalcoaches.com. My cell number is 860-657-6693. And one thing I will also say is that when you do, consider this option, you really have to look at, your active patient base, your number of patients coming in, the number of people on the plan, and you have to think about a marketing strategy. So my company's called Dental Coaches, and I have the belief of not one person can know everything. So I have certain specialty coaches on my team, kind of like a football team, right? Yeah. You have a head coach and you have specialty coaches. So I have a communication specialist coach. I have a marketing strategist coach. I have an assistant coach. I have an insurance coach. And my marketing strategist coach is not tied to any one marketing company, which is nice. So we really sit down together and look at a marketing plan, a budget. We track the ROI. She does the strategy, and I work on the conversion, of the patients and the phone calls and the case agreement, how we're doing with scheduling patients. So there's a lot of different parts to it, and I'd love to share more information with anybody personally, or hear how I can help anyone.
Yeah, awesome. I think even among the greatest of athletes out there or individuals, like even Dwayne Johnson, who naturally I'm a fan of.
Yeah.
These people, super, super successful. One thing that they always have in their life is a good coach. I even have multiple coaches. I have multiple CPAs that coach me in my business. But there's something to say about when you go out and network, you just can't go it alone. Really, you can't. You have to have a support team, a plan of action, and really the right person. We've interviewed people in the past that have been successful going out of network with PPOs, but most of those practices have not dropped Delta Dental. And so for those of you that truly, really do intend to find a way to go out and network with Delta Dental, I highly recommend that you give Susan a call, because what she knows and her experience truly, which we vetted out, it really is one of those really unique processes that she's really nailed down and understands very, very well. So Susan, thank you so much for being on the call today. We really appreciate it. We'll post all the information, your cell phone and your email, in the show notes for those of you that may be driving or doing something else. So check it out. Check out those links to get a hold of Susan. But Susan, again, thank you so much for being with us today.
It was my pleasure, Ben. Thank you, and happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you. Happy Valentine's Day to you as well. And take care, everybody.